Hi guys, I just wanted to make a really quick video here just to talk to everybody about what's going on with the Foulbrood outbreak. This is not going to be the world's prettiest video. It's probably not going to have much in the way of editing. You're going to hear my cats yowling, all kinds of things, but just wanted to get a bit of information out and just to clarify some things because there's a lot of things that are confusing or that you might mistake totally normal or relatively harmless things that are going on with your hive for Foulbrood. And I just don't want anybody to needlessly have a really bad time trying to deal with this. And I want to make sure that those people who are at risk or that do have Foulbrood infections have some information that they can work with. Now, this is sort of an evolving situation, and we're trying to get more help and more information for all of our members from the Guild. But this is what we have right now to tell you, and we'll be keeping you updated as we get more information. So here, let's get started about what is Foulbrood. Foulbrood is a bacterial disease. It is spread by the transfer of infected material from hive to hive. That typically happens two ways. One is through robbing. You've probably read in the newsletter or in your beekeeping book about robbing. That's when bees go into other hives to steal the honey out of those hives, and then of course that can transfer from their little feet getting into the infected material and then transfer it to another hive. The other major way that it tends to get spread is through beekeepers. So if a beekeeper uses the same hive tool on an infected hive and then uses it on an uninfected hive, that can introduce the spores from the Foulbrood into that hive. Also, if they're changing around frames from one hive to another. So these are different ways that it can all spread from hive to hive. The really important thing to know is that these spores can last up to 50 years in the environment. So it is incredibly difficult to get rid of once it is spread around, and it is not something that can actually be treated. So we're really going to focus here on how you're going to prevent it, how you're going to recognize it if you have it, and what you're going to do about it if you think that you may actually have Foulbrood in your apiary. So, first of all, we're going to talk about prevention. Now, all these things are things that you probably should already know about and should already be doing, but we're just going to review them here because they are really important and they're just good apiary management. First of all, you're going to try to control that robbing situation as much as possible. You're going to try to prevent that. So you're going to do things like not opening your hives until later in the day if you can, and being really brief during the dearth, because that's when robbing frenzies can be really set off. We're obviously not going to be open feeding. It's illegal and it's a bad idea anyhow, and it can set off this robbing situation. Things like installing robbing guards. We've written about robbing in the newsletter. There's been a lot of information out there. I'm not going to go through all the different things that you can do to prevent or deal with robbing right now, but that's definitely something that you should be looking into and making sure that you're following best practices on right now. The other major thing that you want to do, of course, is avoid you yourself spreading Foulbrood either into or out of your apiary. So I would recommend that you not use your hive tool or other equipment, say on your friend's hive or your mentee's hive. Use their equipment on their hives and save your equipment for your own hives. If you have multiple locations, it may very well make sense, especially for cheap things like hive tools, to have separate ones for each apiary and not spread things around like that. Obviously, we want to deal with any dead out hives, any hives that have failed or almost failed really promptly, because again, that's a situation where other bees are going to come in and try to rob out that hive, and that can spread disease around. This is, of course, not a good time to be moving hives around if you can avoid it. It isn't usually a time that people want to be moving hives around all that much. So this is definitely a time to think twice about changing the location of your hives and shifting things that could be potentially diseased around. If you do have to use equipment between apiaries, and it's just a good idea to have a nice good fall cleaning now anyhow, you want to make sure that it's very thoroughly cleaned. anything that is not first clean cannot be properly sanitized or sterilized. Okay, that's very important. So if your hive tool is covered with propolis and bits of wax and dead squish bees and so forth, just flaming it will not be as effective as if you first cleaned it and then you flamed it. So, you know, with your hive tool, you might want to clean it first with alcohol and get all that little stuff off of it, and then flame it thoroughly. A good disinfecting solution is 10% bleach with water. If you're talking about things like trying to clean up your bee suit or things like that. Now, of course, it's not as a complete sterilization because you're talking about a soft item here like fabric, and those are never very easy to get completely clean. But if you're just trying to do a little preventative work, that's a good idea to thoroughly wash your bee suit and consider using bleach on it if it is suitable fabric for that. Okay, so the other thing that we're really going to want everybody to do right now is inspecting their hives and checking them for Foulbrood. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about specialized tests that you can do. But the number one thing that you're going to want to do is look at your hive and see whether or not it is actually showing signs of Foulbrood. Now I'm going to go through a list of signs here, and a lot of these signs can be happening with something perfectly innocuous or normal, like having a little bit of chalk brood, or something that's, you know, it's not good, but it's not the same as having Foulbrood. Having your hive die of mites, for instance, can cause a lot of these same symptoms. So I'm going to be going through here, and I'm going to be stressing that some of these things, they're not slam dunk diagnosis. It's just part of the things that you're looking for when you're trying to determine whether or not you have Foulbrood. So, first of all, Foulbrood. It's right there in the name that it is foul. It has a bad odor. A lot of people say this is almost like a barnyard kind of odor if you are to smell it, but they say some people really notice it and smell it, and some people don't notice it and smell it at all. Another thing to bear in mind is that if you have a hive that has died out and there is a lot of dead abandoned brood in it, or a big pile of dead bees in the bottom of it, or some nasty fermenting honey that's full of hive beetle larvae or whatever, that's going to smell bad. It just is. It's going to smell pretty darn bad, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's Foulbrood, okay? So if you're inexperienced with it, you might be going, oh my goodness, it smells bad, that's Foulbrood, but take a good look and try to see if there's a reason, a darn good reason, that it just smells pretty bad. Another symptom that is very common for a lot of other things is a spotty or shotgun brood pattern. And that means that when you have your capped brood, instead of there being nice big swaths of brood where there is nary a cell that is open, you kind of have a cap bit here and a cap bit there and a cap bit here and a cap bit there, and lots of space around it that has perhaps younger brood in it, or honey or whatever else all around with it. That can be an indication of Foulbrood, but it happens for a lot of other reasons too, including things like parasitic mite syndrome, basically that your hive is dying of its mite load, which is incredibly common at this time of year, and while it's not exactly a positive thing, it is not really a 911 emergency like having Foulbrood, because it does not mean that your hive itself is permanently infected in any way. It's simply a problem for this year's bees. So it's a sign, but it's not a really clear sign. So don't freak out if you see it, but just look a little closer at that point. Now we start getting into stuff that's a little bit more specific. Sunken cappings. So instead of those cappings having that nice kind of domed look for them, they start to sink in, and sometimes they start to darken a little bit. And I'm talking about the pupa cappings in this case. I'm not talking about honey cappings, okay? I'm talking about stuff that you're going to see in your brood frames. Another thing is having a hole in those cappings. And again, you can have a hole in the cappings for a lot of reasons. You can have a hole in the capping because the bee is emerging and she's chewing her way out. You can have a hole in the cappings because your bees are doing hygienic behavior and they're cleaning out dead larvae that died of other things that aren't American Foulbrood. You can have all kinds of reasons why you might have a hole in your cappings. In the case of American Foulbrood, that hole is usually off-center, whereas in these other cases, they tend to be more centralized. So take a good look. When you're doing these inspections, you're definitely going to want to bring your flashlight out, and if you're one of those people who is terribly farsighted, I would really recommend that you use a nice magnifying glass, and that you make sure that this flashlight that you're using is a good flashlight, not a cheap swag kind of flashlight, okay? I'm big on that. The other thing that's a really more indicative sign of Foulbrood is what they call a larval scale. So as the larvae die and they kind of dry up inside the infected cells, they sort of shrink down and stick to the side. So it looks almost like a paint chip or something that is inside there. Okay, it'll be black and it'll be sticking in there. Now don't confuse this with other things that might be in there, like perfectly normal pupa casings in there, or pollen, things like that. You're looking for this kind of almost shiny black scale that's sticking in there. Out of that scale, in the case of American Foulbrood, can be this one little kind of stick that's sticking up like this. Again, you're going to need your magnifier. It's going to be very small, and it is actually the pupal tongue of the larval bee, sticking up the pupal bee sticking up. Because it has a lot of structure to it, it doesn't tend to just sort of melt down and stick to the bottom of the cell like the rest of the body of the bee does. It'll stick up there. So that's something to look for, and that's very indicative of American Foulbrood. But don't get confused. Sometimes you can see a dead, mature, or nearly mature bee sticking its head out, and the tongue will be out because it starved to death in there. That is a totally different situation. In this case, the bee itself the bee pupa will be pretty much unrecognizable, just sludge and just this tongue sticking out of it. Again, this is something you're going to want to go and look at pictures and the links that I sent, and go online and really check out those things so that you know what you're looking for and that you're not mistaking these things. The other thing is that the dying and dead larva, before it completely shrinks down and becomes a scale, is a caramel color. Normally, pupa are white or slightly yellowish, kind of creamy color. The ones with Foulbrood will also be what they call snotty looking. Now, I know that when you're a new beekeeper and you're looking at your open brood or your pupa, it does kind of look gross, and some people say, oh, it does look kind of snotty. Now, we're not talking about snotty like you had a slight allergy and you sneezed and in your handkerchief something was a little bit white and shiny and slimy looking. We're talking it's really, really sticky, stringy, like when you had the flu, really, really bad kind of snotty looking, okay? And it's going to be, like I said, this darker color, not a creamy, pearly kind of white color, okay? So when you're looking in, you're going to look for all of these different symptoms, and particularly these things with the scale, the pupal tongue, and the caramel color, and the really, really snotty looking brood. The other stuff, I would just kind of note that, but if you see these things, that's when you're really going to be suspicious that you have Foulbrood, and that's probably when you want to move on to doing some form of actual testing, okay? So, talking about testing, I'm just going to go from kind of the simplest and easiest up to the fancier forms of testing that may be more expensive and more involved. One of the very easiest is the matchstick test, called because you're just going to use a matchstick. So it's really, really easy. So I don't actually have Foulbrood, touch wood, in my apiary yet. So I'm just going to show you this. This is just a regular frame. It actually doesn't even have any pupa or whatever. I'm just using it for demonstration purposes. Beginners, notice that this frame looks pretty yucky, right? It's dark. It's got a little bit of wax moth webbing. It's probably got ants on it. Who knows what else? But this is not a frame that anyone needs to worry about. It just looks a little ugly. So I'm just using it here as a demonstration, and what you're going to do is you're going to stick your matchstick in one of the capped cells that you suspect might have Foulbrood in it, one of those sunken, darkened looking cappings, and you would push it in, you push past the capping, smush the dying larva inside, and then you would pull it out slowly. Now, normally something is going to adhere a little bit to your matchstick, but if it is American Foulbrood, that adherence will cause the snottiness to pull out in a string, just like, you know, when you had that really nasty sneeze, when you had the flu, it's going to pull out in a nasty looking caramel colored string that's about 3/4 of an inch long or 2 centimeters long. Basically nothing else does that. If you have European Foulbrood, it might look snotty and darkened and smell bad, but it's not going to do this stringy thing that we're talking about here. So that's the matchstick test, and that's a very good thing to just try out there, because you can just use, like I say, a matchstick, a piece of straw, a bamboo skewer, a toothpick, whatever. Something that's just a little bit rough that's going to catch on that pupa and that is small. And then when you're done with that, what I would always recommend you do is toss that into your smoker and burn it up. That way, if there was anything on it that was contagious, you've just taken care of that by burning it in your smoker. Okay, good practice there. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is the Holtz milk test. I like this test because it is a cheap test to do and not too difficult. It's great for someone like me who has a bunch of hives, because I can make up enough material to test dozens and dozens of hives for just pennies. And it's a good one to do, I think, if you should get a hive that is suspect, but you're not really very sure because you're not very experienced or you're not feeling a lot of confidence in your diagnosis. This would be a good place to start. Another nice thing about it is that you can do it using stuff that you just get from your grocery store, or you might already have lying around the house. So what you are going to need is you're going to need some powdered milk. I'm told that you can also use fresh milk for this, but I don't know what the proportions actually are, so I'm going with the powdered milk recipe. I found you can't actually get powdered milk at Whole Foods. You're going to have to go to Safeway. I guess it is not lowbrow enough for them or something. But anyhow, you buy this and you then have tons of powdered milk in case you ever have a natural disaster or something. You have way more than you're going to ever need. Anybody needs some? I've got tons. Come and get some. Okay, so you're going to get your powdered milk, and you're going to get some warm water. You're going to need 100 milliliters of warm water, which is about 3.5 fluid ounces, not weight ounces, or a bit more than half a cup. Okay, so you would fill this with your warm water, and then you would take a half teaspoonful of the powdered milk and you would mix it with that, and this is the result, is that you get a really, really thin, milky fluid like this. Okay, now very important, you're not going to use this full 100 milliliters. That's too much and it won't work for the test. So what you're going to do is you're going to open it up and you're going to put it in a small container. I happen to have these nice little containers that Kendall gave me for something else. These actually hold 5 milliliters completely, and what I did is I wrote the hive number on them so that I could keep track of which was which. Again, this is a really great test to do if you have several hives to do at once. So I draw this up. You can measure this using like a syringe. I happen to know that this holds 5 milliliters in here, and just like that. So what I did is I made a whole bunch of these and I just took them out to my apiary. I didn't actually see any signs of Foulbrood, but I ran the test anyhow, just to give myself a little extra peace of mind. Now, what you're going to end up doing is just like with the matchstick test, is you're going to be poking this into your suspect cells and getting some nice goop on the matchstick. And then you're going to put that goop into the little vial, and you're going to shake it up for about 20 seconds. Now you're going to need to incubate this at about body temperature, about 94 to 98 degrees, kind of the same as it is in the hive, for 30 minutes. Now, what I did to keep it warm while I was going from hive to hive and doing all of this is I got a hot and cold pack that I warmed up to about body temperature, and then I put it in the pocket of my bee suit up against my body, and then I tucked it in between that and me so that it stayed warm while I was outside because it was cool out the day that I was doing this. I'm not sure if that's entirely necessary before you do the formal incubation, but I wanted to be sure that it stayed warm, so that's an easy way to do that. Now for the actual incubation, for those of you that don't have an incubator at home like I do, you can actually incubate this using your body heat. So this is kind of funny, but you're gonna just stick it in your armpit. Ladies, you can stick it in your bra, stick it down into your underwear, so it's really up close to your body, and just have it hang out there for 30 minutes. When you're done with the 30-minute incubation, you're gonna take it out and you're gonna look at it. Now what you're hoping for is that it's basically gonna have not changed like this. It's just gonna be milky white. There's not really any solids or anything besides any little bits that you pulled off that matchstick in there. If you have American Foulbrood, this will no longer be milky and cloudy and white. Instead, it will be pretty much clear and kind of a yellowish gold color, looking a lot like apple juice in it. And then the solid parts will have precipitated out. So basically the milk is going to kind of curdle in here, and you're going to have the liquid part be that golden color, and then the solid part will precipitate out. If it does kind of halfway in between that, where it kind of clumped up some, but it didn't actually go to that apple juice clarity color, then you might have European Foulbrood in there, according to what the websites and everything say. I did not get any positives on my test, but it was a nice thing to be able to run that cheaply and easily for a little extra peace of mind. So that's a great test to do. That's called the Holtz milk test. You can also buy commercial American Foulbrood test kits. They basically look a lot like a little pregnancy test kit stick. And you can read the directions on there, but basically the process is kind of similar in that you're going to put some of the matter from your hive onto that and check it out. Oh, another thing with the Holtz milk test is that I'm told you can also use that on scale. So if you have just a hive that's completely dead and there's no longer any dying larvae to use on that, a dead out hive, and you want to know if those frames are going to be safe for you to use in future, you can do the Holtz milk test on that. So these commercial tests, like I said, the commercial test, getting back to that, is about $15. You can order them from Man Lake, Better Bee, basically all the major apiary supply houses carry them, and you can use that to do your tests as well. Like I say, the downside of that is just that it's expensive to do that, but they are supposed to be quite accurate. I talked to the agricultural department about it, and they say that those tests do sometimes produce a false negative if you don't do them completely correctly, meaning that it will show that you don't have American Foulbrood when actually you do because you messed something up. However, if it does show that you have American Foulbrood, that's a pretty clear indication that's probably correct. They very rarely have a false negative. The other option is you can, if you are suspecting these things, maybe you've run the matchstick test or the Holtz milk test and things look really bad. It really looks like you probably have Foulbrood, but you don't have complete confidence. You can also call the Ag Department of San Mateo County, and they will come out and test your apiary for free. And their number is 650-363-4000. Again, it's 650-363-4000. And they'll come out and test it for free. Now, of course, please, don't use them as your first line of defense. Do check for some of these things first yourself, because we want to make sure that that resource is available for the people who really are likely infected and need the help and support of the Ag Department at this time. So what do you do if you run these tests and you call the ag department or whatever you did and you're pretty sure that you have Foulbrood on here? Okay, so unfortunately what will happen is you will need, if your bees are not already all dead, you will need to euthanize your hive to prevent the spread. Two good ways of doing that that are reasonably safe for you, and you want to be doing this at dusk when all the bees are in the hive, is to kill them with some kind of soapy water solution. You're pulling out the frames and you're spraying them with soapy water really thoroughly. I hear that Simple Green, the cleaner, is also particularly effective for doing this. The other way that you could consider killing them is using carbon dioxide with dry ice. And now, of course, be careful, don't handle it with your bare hands, use oven mitts and so forth, because otherwise you can give yourself a freeze burn. But otherwise that's fairly safe for humans to use, unless you were doing something silly like filling a whole room for it and locking yourself into it. You're not going to hurt yourself with it. So that's another option you can use to euthanize your bees, which is a little bit less hands-on and thus a little bit perhaps emotionally easier on you. But you do need to euthanize the bees so that they will not be spreading the disease to other colonies. Once you have euthanized your bees, you need to thoroughly bag and contain your hive. You don't want to kill the bees and then walk away, because of course then other bees will come in and start robbing out that hive, and you've just created an ideal situation for spreading this disease. I would say double or even triple bag it in contractor bags, a really tough kind if you can, but thoroughly wrap it up in some sort of plastic. Be aware that if it's a warm day when you're doing this, or if you're going to be transporting it somewhere for disposal, and the sun's shining on it, once the bees are off of it, of course, the honey is likely to start running out of it and so forth. So you want to make sure that you're containing any of that. You don't want that getting out, being fed on by other bees and spreading the disease further. The other thing that you're going to want to do pretty immediately after you've found this is you're going to want to report it to the ag department. It's actually mandated that you must report it there. The ag department has been really, really nice to the beekeepers who have had this problem. They've been super. They've been helping us out. Please try to comply with them and help them to help you. They're going to be able to talk to you a lot about what your next steps are, and give you a lot of information, and they're trying to get even more resources available to support us in this. Infected hives, the law is that they must be burned. The technical way that you're ideally supposed to do this is dig a 2-foot hole in the ground to contain the melting wax and the honey, and burn the hive completely in there. And then you would bury the ashes afterwards. Now, I know we're living in California. There really isn't room in a lot of people's backyards to do that safely. We have spare the air days. We have burn bans because of fire hazards, all these other complications, and we are trying to work with the local fire departments, the agricultural department, EPA, everybody. We're all trying to kind of figure out the best way to handle this. Like I said, in the meantime, if you're not able to immediately burn your hive in this way, in a way that is safe and legal, at least bag it and contain it at that point, okay? The other thing that you need to know is that if you have one hive, say, that had the American Foulbrood, but then maybe you have another hive, or your neighbor has a hive that doesn't have it, you might want to look into prophylactically treating that hive with terramycin. Now, you cannot treat a hive that's actually showing symptoms with terramycin. It won't work, and it's not legal. But if it's kind of just on the verge of becoming infected, the terramycin can prevent it from taking a proper foothold in that hive. You will need a doctor's prescription, a veterinarian's prescription for the terramycin in there, and I am working with a group of vets that I believe will be able to help us on that, and I'll be providing that information for you soon when it's available for me. as to how you can do that. Bear in mind that if you do end up treating your hive with terramycin, you cannot use any of the honey that is on that hive for human consumption. This is very, very important. Many people are allergic to the psyllin antibiotics, and you could cause them to have a severe medical emergency or even die. So please, please, please do not cheat. Mark all those frames with a big X or something, and make sure that you never use any honey that was in the hive when you were doing that treatment. And please, of course, make sure that you are following all the directions with treatments on there so as not to create bacterial resistant American Foulbrood, antibiotic resistant American Foulbrood. So that's it. That's the main things that you need to know. Basically, I would recommend that everybody keep a close eye on their hives, do an inspection, especially if you live within 4 miles of one of the affected areas, because that's about the distance that bees typically go when they're foraging or when they might be robbing out another hive. Keep up your good regular apiary practices, control robbing, deal with your dead outs